What wedding moment made you think, they're not going to last long? Then she went alone on her honeymoon because she booked a trip to the Caribbean despite her newlywed husband having a severe sun allergy. She was a good friend and they had been together for some years. They married young and it didn't occur to them that it would be strange if she went on the honeymoon and he stayed behind. He was a good guy. He just wanted to see her happy and she really wanted to go on this vacation because she had never left the country. They separated half a year after the wedding and my friend, the bride, told me that the marriage had been a way to prolong the relationship despite both of them knowing that it was already over some time before they got married. Kinda like a couple gets a baby to save a marriage. It really was just sad because they were a nice couple, but they stayed friends after separating. And I can guarantee that she didn't cheat on him all the way. They were both really loyal. About his sun allergy, he had red hair, a really fair skin, and burned up within minutes. And I mean really bad sunburn, the kind you have to go to the hospital for. He always had to wear sunglasses, long-armed shirts, and a hat, even on cloudy days, so the vacation was not for him. I bet their wedding photos are interesting. Him fully covered in protective gear, her radiant. The honeymoon photos, just her. Iconic. Story 2. I was the best man at a wedding a few years back. At the rehearsal dinner, his future in-laws were treating him like crap. They were bossing him around, making him do crap and talking down to him. They didn't let him hang out with his groomsmen afterwards while the bride went out and got hammered. They are now divorced. Story 3. My father-in-law initially came at me with a suppressive attitude, pre-wedding, and he invited me to go firing thinking I'd be worried about it, so I went. Sometime in the conversation I told him, I quit giving a crap what my parents said 8 years ago when I got thrown out of my house, and I've been taking care of myself ever since. To be honest, I'd rather get along with you, but if we can't make that happen, that's even less I have to give a crap about. A lot of problems come from people not standing up for themselves. And it's impossible without that as well as the couple standing up for each other and having this is our family attitude. Fortunately, my wife cared more about our relationship than her parents. I still tolerate her dad and we're pleasant to each other and he doesn't cross lines with me like he does with other in-laws. Wife and I have been married for over 20 years. Story 4. I was kindly included in the last-minute +1 to the wedding of a family friend who had never met before. At the rehearsal dinner, or the German equivalent, the Polterabend, the guests smashed ceramic and porcelain items on the ground. I was fresh in Germany, so this was all pretty out of context and frightening, but my boyfriend explained that it's a tradition, reminding the couple that life is sometimes difficult and you have to work together to clean it up. The bride kind of half-heartedly motioned to the groom to sweep it up. He did a little bit, then just moved on to talk to his friends, leaving most of the shards strewn around the yard. Additionally, I don't think I saw the couple talk to each other once over the next 3 days of celebrations. It was a gorgeous wedding, and I'm so grateful that I was invited. Really good way to begin living in a new country, but it wasn't surprising to hear that they divorced a few years later. Story 5. Wedding photographer here. I can think of a few. Full-blown row during dinner, and another couple fistfight during the first dance. An infamous one for me was leaving a venue late one night, and as I'm walking to the train, I can see the bride down an alley, on her knees with the best man. I was the wedding photographer for a reality TV show. End of the night, I'm having a few drinks with the film crew, and the groom has come up to me and one of the producers and says, I think I've made a big mistake. So we're trying to be reassuring and telling him it's natural to second-guess such a big decision, to which he replies, No, I think I'm gay. I had them both on Facebook. The drama the next week was mesmerizing to watch unfold. Story 6. Showed up to the wedding of a friend of my husband's who I knew casually. When we arrived at the church, the groom was very hammered in the parking lot and getting more intoxicated by the minute. I thought it was kind of crazy since it was a full Catholic ceremony which involved lots of kneeling and standing. I honestly have no idea how he made it though, but he did. At the reception, he proceeded to continue the drinking party, while his new wife cried in the washroom. When it was the time for the first dance, he kind of stumbled around the dance floor despite a year of dance lessons. When it was time for him to take his new wife's garter off and throw it to the bachelors, he instead did a tease-type dance and got himself down in front of many elderly family members. People were shocked and talking, and all in all, it was a crap show. They gave this marriage a year or two tops. They, however, are still married 25-plus years later. Story 7. I was maid of honor. Me, the best man, and a couple went into a separate little room to do the signing stuff. Bride excused herself to go to the bathroom, and the groom started making pretty mean remarks about her cooking. SJH, she's passionate about, to the officiary. She came back, heard they were talking about cooking family meals together, and gave him the warmest smile, thinking he had praised her. He scoffed awkwardly and changed the topic. That always stuck with me. He wasn't laughing with her, but at her, behind her back. It lasted 7 months. Story 8. The ceremony was delayed because the bride and groom were on the phone with the groom's mother, who refused to come to the wedding, trying to be talked into still going through with it. Apparently, they had a huge and physical fight the night before. The roommate at the time didn't come either. He told me what he saw in the house the night before was enough for him to know this wedding was doomed and they should not be dating, let alone getting married. Story 9. My wife got invited to a client's daughter's wedding. The couple were both drama students. Many of the bridal party were drama students. The maid of honor's toast consisted of tearful declarations of unrequited love to the groom, along the lines of, "If it couldn't be me, I'm glad it's my best friend that's marrying you." The best man's speech was a crazy declaration of, "If it doesn't work out, call me, babe," like the previous time he called me. The other toasts were similarly weird. A guy at the table I was seated at was a friend of the bride and said to me that he was this close to standing up during the "speak now or forever hold your peace" thing. I'm still not sure if the whole thing was a bunch of emotionally messed up 20-year-olds or one big piece of performance art. Story 10. My best friend's wedding is tomorrow, and I told her about how I've heard several wedding photographers or videographers say that shoving cake in the face is almost a sure factor that they're going to divorce. She told me, "Oh yeah, I told him not to, but he probably will anyways. So we'll see how this goes." This wedding is going to be less happily ever after and more happily ever after the divorce. Just skipping a step, really. Story 11. I live for these threads. Anyway, I know a photographer who has offered to shoot a wedding on the Gold Coast, Australia. If you're from Australia, then you know the Gold Coast, while beautiful, has a lot of Jersey Shore types living there. It's kind of like Miami, but no celebrities and very, very trashy. My friend is getting drinks with everybody getting dressed up at the same time because the groom, groomsmen, bride, and bridesmaids are all getting ready in the same room. The groom decided to have his bucks party, bachelor, stag do, the night before, so they're all hungover as crap and doing substances. Something that is making my photographer friend's job hard because she can't get any nice shots of the groom or groomsmen without these things in view. The energy in the room is getting uncomfortable, so the bride asks if they could take it easy on the substances and get a couple of nice photos. The groom yells, "Shut up!" and keeps doing more. The girl who got my friend the gig said they divorced 4 months later. Another friend of mine was pressured into marrying his girlfriend of like 8 years because she dropped an ultimatum. "Propose to me within a year or we're done." He does, so they get married, but of every wedding photo she posted on Facebook, neither one of them looked happy. They divorced barely a year into the marriage. Story 12. I'm a wedding photographer and have a few of these. When a very young, not dating, long couple say things like the partner is perfect and we never fight. When there's name calling, I particularly cringed at it's because we get each other and are so comfortable that he can call me Dumb Witch as a nickname. Hey didn't last the year. One where the wedding was all about the groom promoting his band. He even sang his bride a song that was literally just him showing off his vocal range with some classic piece. He stood up and joined him on stage halfway through and he looked annoyed that he had to share the limelight. They lasted about 2 years. He was sleeping with the other vocalist in the band. Story 13. This was my sister's best friend and it was a bachelorette party moment. Bride had been having an affair. Everyone knew it. The groom's friends tried to tell him, but she convinced him they were making it up. I mean, at that point, it was just sad. She actually had the to force fiancé to apologize to the guy she was sleeping with for the accusations. The night of the bachelorette party, she actually took all of her bridesmaids back to the other guy's house and spent the night with him. They came to their wedding. It was so awkward. Everyone knew and everyone was talking. The groom was told, but chose to overlook it. After the wedding, she insisted the other guy come on vacations with her and her husband and included him in all their social functions. Now, if they're non-monogamous, whatever. Go crazy. But her husband was an absolute wreck about it for years and she just kept gaslighting him. No one could convince him to leave her. She told my sister that the affair guy insisted he would never marry her and didn't want kids, so she was using fiancé to get them. They ended up divorcing 2 years later after their second child was born. She immediately moved in with the affair guy and they did end up getting married. Story 14. At my boyfriend's sister's wedding, the groom got hammered before the vows and smoked after the vows. Was cross-faded as hell and made a fool of himself. When we went up to congratulate them after, she refused to be near him or take pictures of them. It was awkward. After the speeches, basically everyone left. Family was still around and they opened gifts. Someone gave her some nice champagne and the groom tried to open it and dropped it and it shattered. Bride stormed off screaming. Groom got upset and started screaming out in the air. They still went to their honeymoon together in Florida and she got pregnant almost immediately. Maybe 7 months into her pregnancy, she kicked him out because he slept with a roommate. They got divorced when their kid was 6 months old. But it's for the best. The dude is a POS and wasted a lot of their money by being selfish in their day. Story 15. I'm witnessing one from the sidelines now. My wife's brother just got married this past May. Bride's mother is a big DIY person and went a little nuts with extra flowers, table pieces, decorations, etc. Note I said extra. It was already decorated by the venue, she just took it upon herself to buy and add way more stuff. Anyway, a few weeks ago, she sent my mother-in-law, Groom's mom, an email with receipts of all the extra stuff she bought. $7,000 worth. And asked that she pay half since it was technically set up in time for their rehearsal dinner for guests to enjoy. It's causing a huge rift between the newlyweds since the bride is taking her mom's side. Story 16. She had a panic attack while getting ready that he wouldn't show up while implying he didn't actually want to be married again, but they were too far into it for him to back out. They were both barely 21, and it was his second marriage. Did I mention they got engaged 6 weeks after they met? And they only waited that long because his divorce wasn't final. She was relieved when he did show and only had a few shots to build up his courage to be there, i.e. he was crap-faced by 11 a.m. They separated a year later, but she somehow ended up pregnant around the same time. They got back together for the baby and then divorced when the baby was 2. Within a month of separating, she, and their kid, was living with a new guy that she had known for 3 weeks. Story 17. Where to start? The best man was the groom's dealer who dressed in tux, the only one in a tux. The groom was spiked and giggled throughout the whole ceremony. The host of the party alternated between arguing with his wife in Russian and running up to us every time he saw us, the bride's friends, the only people that showed up from her side at the wedding. Whenever he saw us in groups of 2 or more and tell us, "Don't smoke. If she, his wife, won't let me smoke in the house, then you guys can't." Every time we grouped up. Story 18. Friend's wedding back in 2016. A somewhat nice affair for us, given we were in our early 20s and all. I was a bridesmaid and really hadn't met the groom much prior. It was nice, but quiet. Day before the wedding, the bride, a longtime friend, asked me to help babysit one of the groomsmen because he was a nightmare. Asked me, another bridesmaid, DJ, works to help cut him off from alcohol before the ceremony, not to allow him to make a speech, keep him from hitting on girls, the works. He had drinking habits with 6 kids and 2 DUIs, but was the absolute best friend to the groom. Day of the wedding, the best schmuck breaks into the bar, gets hammered, has to be dragged down the aisle, gets the florist intoxicated while they pretty much have intimacy in the dance floor, and makes what I can only assume be a speech during the father-daughter dance. The bride was mad and stressed, as well as trying to get things to be not a total crap show. Groom blocked us from keeping him in check, wanting us to just let it go while he did everything the bride asked him not to do. It was like a weird, purposeful or intentional self-sabotage thing. Schmuck also broke into the groom's private stash of homemade meat he'd made special just for the wedding and ran through the parking lot hiding in the bushes at 11 p.m. Same night, the couple texted me asking if I wanted to be their third in their open relationship, which I found out later was mostly the groom's idea. I also found out later they got married pretty quickly because she suddenly needed medical benefits, all the while he had been asking for an open relationship for the complete duration of them being together. She'd only acquiesce if he would marry her as well. Divorce finalized a year and a half later. Story 19. I wasn't at a wedding, but it was the first time I really sat down to talk to the couple. I came to town about a year after the wedding, and my wife, cousin to the groom, and I met them for drinks at one of the cool parts of the cool city. One of the first topics of conversation was what we knew about the lifestyle scene. Afterward, I pointed out to my wife that the bride seemed to have been rather openly and boldly flirting with her. My wife shrugged it off because I'm often pretty terrible at that kind of thing. We met one more time, this time for a funeral. After the ceremony, we were hanging out in a hotel room, drinking. The bride again seemed to be pretty openly flirting with my wife, and this time was going out of her way to show off her talent for bedroom knots. Again, the groom is there in the room. I pointed out all of this again, and this time my wife tacitly agreed. The two would divorce soon after. The bride, it seems, only discovered, or accepted, that she was a lesbian after she'd gone married. Story 20. Not a wedding moment as much as a bachelor party moment, but my ex got married to a woman 2 years ago from a super conservative religious family. We were still friends for the most part, and I was surprised he asked me to be a groomsman, but I figured, hey, it's always good to be able to stay friends with your exes. That feels like mature growth and closure. They got really intoxicated at the bachelor party, and at one point, asked me if I ever had any regrets about us breaking up. I said I had loved him, but no. He'd made the right decision in the long run. And then he told me that he sometimes wishes that we were getting married the next week and how his fiance's family will never accept him. And then after an awkward pause, he said, "What if we just run away together?" Laughed it off as a joke and said we should rejoin the group. Then he said it again later, again in a joke tone, and then a third time later in the night. We had been friends for years, but only dated for like 6 months. Turns out he asked the same thing to another one of his exes who wasn't a groomsman but was attending the wedding. The couple is still together, technically, but separated. Story 21. I've got two. One of my good friends got married and had never met her before the wedding because she's just shy. On the wedding day, she was belligerently intoxicated before the ceremony even started and couldn't even get through the lines she was supposed to repeat, i.e., I promise to love you. She ended up slapping the groom, spilling champagne in her dress, and then crying under a table while he tried to comfort her. They lasted about 4 months. Another one was my wife's friend. She's a very conservative, religious white girl who married a black man. Most of her prejudiced family didn't approve the marriage and didn't show up, but she planned the whole marriage around race, like a vanilla cake for her and a chocolate cake for him. The wedding colors were black and white, and even the meals were white meat for her side and dark meat for his. It was extremely uncomfortable as a guest. They lasted 2 years, but broke up because he was cruel and almost ended her, rather than the weird racial tension. Story 22. She told me 2 days before that she found her fiancé annoying and that she didn't like him and that he was awful in bed. She was visibly, endlessly uncomfortable at the rehearsal wedding or dinner combo. Then she sobbed the entire morning, day of. She ended up not getting any makeup done because she wouldn't stop scream-sobbing and refused to get dressed, stalling the wedding around 35 minutes. She then said 45 minutes of vows that she had prepared, 9 pages of things like inappropriate vows to friends and family, his parents and sisters, none of them her husband. Then almost didn't say I do. Managed to get yeah, I do, out of her almost a full 60 seconds after she was supposed to say anything. I could go on for hours, but it was the most painful and awkward wedding I've ever been to. I got money in 10 months. We're 1 month in. Story 23. Not at the wedding itself, but I used to work at David's Bridal. Bride came in with tons of friends. We did the say yes to the dress thing, and an hour later, she'd be standing there with $3,000 worth of stuff and doesn't have any money with her or in her account. She decides she wants to apply for the store credit card. I run it through the system, and she gets denied. She then calls the groom for his info, which, to be fair, people did all the time, and he tells her no. She threw a huge fit in the phone with him, standing on the bridal stage, literally demanding, "Why not? Why? Why?" Like an actual child over and over again. I've never seen a 30-year-old age backwards so quickly. It was just a spoiled kid, literally stomping her feet in front of me, all her friends and the other bride in the store. I was embarrassed. At the end of all that, she hangs up on him and her friend is like, "I'm so sorry you can't get your dress." And the bride stops crying instantly and just goes, "Oh, I'll get the dress. I just have to do this at home, and when he gets mad enough, he'll come get it for me, so I'll stop." Speechless. Sure enough, a girl came back 2 days later with her man, and he applied for the credit card and bought the dress. He was livid and silent, and she was smug as hell. Can't imagine they're having a happy marriage if they're still together. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 24. The couple has lasted, but the relationship to one of their families hasn't. Lesbian wedding. One of them is very sweet, but comes from a very trashy Irish-American family. At the reception, her drunk father stands up and takes the microphone and sings a traditional Irish wedding song, very pointedly not changing the genders. When a man leaves his mother, etc. This went on for like 7 minutes, and it felt like hours. My cousin was marrying her, and she looked about ready to punch the old guy's lights out. Story 25. It was mine. Ex-wife had a taste for theatrics and wanted a choreographed dance number for the first dance. Wanted the whole wedding party involved, but there was no interest. I'd never danced, not even at a club, but was willing to take lessons with her with the understanding he would do something together so she could have her dream wedding. I sucked but got through a few lessons of slow dancing. I can now awkwardly shuffle around but don't expect anything crazy. The dance school wouldn't choreograph anything for us, so she promptly gave up. When it came to choosing the song, she decided she wanted I Want You To by Weezer, my favorite band, and the song just come out recently, which has a jamboree feel to it. It is not a slow song to slow dance to. I suggested we choose something else, but she insisted we would just slow dance to it. I made her promise she wouldn't change her mind. Sure enough, 30 seconds into the song, she backs up and starts dancing a jig. I just stood there in disbelief, fuming, while she kept shouting and motioning for me to dance in front of all our guests. To boot, we had set a budget. She exceeded it. Then our parents decided to chip in $5,000, and rather than use it to offset what we were over budget, she decided to spend more. In retrospect, that should have been a huge clue that she didn't respect me at all. Cheated on me and ran off with some guy like a year later. Got remarried before we were legally divorced. Our parents never did hand over the $5,000 because they'd put a provision on it that we had to group north for a weekend and take some stupid Christian financial planning course their friend ran. My ex was also an atheist and didn't want to do that, but knowingly spent the money we didn't actually have. For frick's sake. Story 26. While they were planning the wedding, the bride came to me and asked, "Is it normal to realize that getting married is a huge mistake but still go through with it? Do you think we can still be happy?" I tried to talk gently to her about everything, and she admitted that her and her groom had already had intimacy and that if she didn't marry him, nobody else would want used goods and she would go to hell. They got married. The worst part is they'll probably stay married forever because they're very religious and God doesn't allow for divorce. It was really hard to watch the bride cry as she walked down the aisle. Not happy tears either. Story 27. I went to a wedding held at my town's hunting lodge. Tons of stuffed animals on the walls and no AC in July. Bride was 7 months pregnant and smoking outside in between the wedding and the after party, and the new husband was totally crap-faced by the second song, which was by Nirvana as requested by the bride's 16-year-old daughter. The whole thing was one giant trashy show. They divorced a year later. I'm guessing the wedding favors were tiny bottles of whiskey and a good luck with that note. Story 28. When I was in college, I went to a wedding with my girlfriend at the time during one summer. She and I had only been together for a few months, so it was actually the first time I had met the bride and the groom and most of her family for that matter. I didn't really say anything to my girlfriend at the time because I didn't know them at all, aside from the story she told me, but I had a feeling they wouldn't last very long. At the reception, she spent most of her time just talking with her friends and didn't interact much with anyone else at all. He went around and tried to get time with everyone, but every so often I would see him with her and she would kind of not even acknowledge that he was there very much. When I walked past her one time on the way to grab a beer, she was bragging to her friends about how much money the dress cost her and how he wanted her to get a cheaper one, but she wouldn't have it. At one point of the night, I was outside smoking with some of the other guests and he came out the back and asked to bum a cigarette. It was one of those types of people that only smokes when they were intoxicated, which apparently it wasn't that often for him since he was doing his residency at the hospital. So he was always really busy. The entire time he kept looking at the door, and whenever it opened and someone came out, he quickly moved his hand holding the cigarette behind his back because he thought it was her. It was like he was scared of her and not in a playful way. It didn't surprise me when about a year later they got divorced. Apparently she just kind of was taking advantage of him. Staying home all day, she didn't work, spending thousands of dollars ordering clothes and shoes online using his money and credit cards she took out in their names. Story 29. That was my thinking of my own wedding. I had no control over it. It was all his family. At the reception at the local fairgrounds. Fried chicken and corn on the cob for the meal. Husband chewed me out that there would be no music and absolutely no dancing because he refused to dance. Mother-in-law and son-in-law ordered 6 cases of cheap champagne and got mad when no one would drink it, including me, then literally could not give it away. The after party, as the reception was like 2 hours for lunch, was at the mother-in-law's. The husband promised as a wedding gift that he was officially done smoking. He had his entire family form a circle around him so he could quickly try to smoke a whole pack, blocked from my view. I had a friend pick me up and I left. There are significantly more what-the-heck moments before and after, but he lasted 2 months. Story 30. I worked at a museum that also doubled as a wedding venue in the summers. As part of the wedding package, the museum would stay open after hours for the guests, only so I'd just sit there and greet people, basically. One wedding got particularly rowdy. Almost everyone was intoxicated, people were jumping into the fountain, someone vomited in said fountain. At one point, the bride is crying. Turns out the groom and one of his groomsmen were upstairs in one of their bathrooms. A fight ensued between the groom and the father of the bride, and cops were called because it really got ugly. Entertaining for me, but I felt so bad for the bride. Story 31. Not the couple getting married, but the best man and maid of honor who were married to each other. Best man's speech was all about how hard it was to be married. I've been married for a year and it feels like 100 years. Maid of honor stands up to give a speech and just says, "Ditto." It was so awkward and really brought the whole room down. Brother of the bride stood up and gave a nice impromptu speech about teamwork and having a partner to go through life with. How happy the family was to have the groom join their family. Best man and maid of honor were divorced within a year. Couples who got married are still married 30 plus years later. I sometimes wonder if the speeches actually were helpful and how to not act as a couple. For me, the complex backstory. Bride's brother is gay and has been in a long-term relationship for 40 plus years. At the time he gave his speech about marriage, he couldn't marry the man he loved, and I think his passionate defense of marriage was born from that. When people would say they were against gay marriage because it makes a mockery of marriage, I'd think of that night. The married couple who had no respect for marriage could easily marry, and did over and over again, and the man who stood up and defended marriage could not. He's married now, and lovingly takes care of his husband as he battles health issues. Story 32. This would be the wedding of my own parents. They'd been divorced for many years but told us, the kids and their spouses, they were planning to get remarried. I would like to go with them to Las Vegas to witness this event. We were all still in our 20s, so we thought, hell yeah. Flash forward to 2 days into the weekend, and there has been no word of a wedding. The kids all had a conversation. What should we do? Should we ask about it? That should have been our first clue that it wasn't a good idea for them to get married, but lack of perspective made us oblivious to the obvious. So we pressured them. Hey, you told us you were going to get remarried. When are you going to do it? Anyway, then we suddenly found ourselves in a courtroom speaking to the judge. He was wise and asked to speak privately to my parents, and I'm sure asked them, why are you doing this? Are you sure? Well, I guess they gave him the correct answers because he did it. Long story short, they ended up divorcing again, not long afterwards. Story 33. Not quite a wedding moment, but I had one at a dinner my ex-wife and I had with some newlywed friends of hers. It was 10 days after their wedding, and we all went out to dinner at a local restaurant that had a psychic act that played in their bar. My ex-wife and her friend wanted to get their palms or tea leaves or whatever read. While the two ladies were with a psychic 10 days after the wedding, 3 days after returning from the honeymoon, the creep suggested we plan to go to Vancouver, BC, since street working had recently been decriminalized there, and it was only a few hours' drive. I declined. They also told my ex-wife, who eventually told her friend, who was a paralegal who divorced her husband within 18 months. And that's how karma paid for all the document prep for my amicable divorce. Story 34. There is this couple I know. They've been in and out of their relationship for several years, sometimes only a few weeks in between breakups. They're constantly fighting, and the girl is a manipulative witch. It took them 3 years between deciding to get married and actually doing it because she kept toying with him, breaking up every time they got close. He's not much better either. The type of guy who gets hammered and aggressive, picking fights for the hell of it. She used to have a crush on me and vice versa, and I thank God for dodging that bullet in the end. I just feel bad for their kid who has to grow up in such an environment. Story 35. Source, my wedding. We'll start 3 days before. The wedding was a Ren Fair-style wedding outside of the large gazebo, and the maid of honor had promised to purchase a stylized dress for my bride that they had agreed on. 3 days before the wedding, she called to tell us she had no money and was embarrassed to admit it. So we literally hand-sewed knot together in 24 hours. In my opinion, it turned out pretty nice for what we had. The bride's mother was supposed to pick up the cake in ATX and drive an hour south for the wedding. She left her house 30 minutes before the wedding to pick it up. When she finally showed up, an hour late, the cake was destroyed. She put it in the backseat and drove like hell all the way down, just slamming it against the box with every turn. During the hour delay, there was almost a fistfight between the two groomsmen because, well, the maid of honor showed up in the dress that she was unable to afford. Obvious attempts to upstage the bride. The same maid of honor during her speech after the ceremony started it off by saying, "Well, we all met. I did not like Dracker M411 at all. However, I found that he grows on you, like a fungus." Needless to say, my entire side of the family was super cold to all of this. Since all of these issues were on her side of friendships or families, I was told to suck it up and we'll discuss later. I sort of assumed that a lot of these friends had just shown themselves the door. Quite the opposite. In fact, 2 years later, when I accepted my first well-paying job out of college, it became an issue that it was an hour and a half out of Austin. So she decided to just stay in ATX to be with her friends. I mailed the divorce papers, and since she couldn't be bothered to even show up to the hearing, I've never seen her again. Story 36. I was a deputy sheriff taking an in-custody defendant to his court date. Turns out it was his wedding appointment. When the judge asked if there was anyone who objected, the assistant DA in the back stood up and proceeded to blow my mind. The groom had a pending domestic case later that day where the bride was also the victim. The man was well known as cruel. On the last call, he held a weapon to the brides before being taken into custody. They were getting married so the bride could not be compelled to testify against the groom. The entire courtroom went silent until the judge spoke. Well, who am I to stand in the way of love? And with that, he banged his gravel. They were married. The ADA's case fell apart. He was released that day and back in jail by the next week. I'll let you guess what he was arrested for. Story 37. When she blackmailed the guy into a proposal. When he joined the military to get away. When he came home to her living with her new boyfriend and his son effectively in a cage watching movies all day. When she screamed, "If you leave me, I will take their son away from you forever." He left. She threw him in jail with an offense. He was given probation. She was so messed up, the court still sided with him in custody. He's living with a son and new wife, living a happy life. She is not great. Story 38. I've been to a few. The first was a tossed-together Santa-themed wedding for my wife's cousin. He'd gotten his girlfriend pregnant, so they rushed to get married before the baby came. The wedding was held at a VFW with a groom and bride dressed as Santa and Mrs. Claus. The groomsmen and bridesmaids were all dressed as Christmas elves, and the music was provided via a boombox. It was 1997. You could tell that no one was happy about the wedding. The parents of the couple just glared at each other, and I don't think they ever spoke. I honestly think the only one who was excited was the groom. They had the baby a couple months later and were divorced almost immediately thereafter. Another was a 19-year-old friend of my daughter. My daughter was the maid of honor and really didn't like the groom. Apparently, he was from a very conservative Christian family, but had managed to hide most of his most extreme beliefs. The wedding started off typical enough, but soon veered off into craziness. There was talk about the wife submitting to and obeying the husband, that she was his helpmate, and she was to provide him with children. It was very Handmaid's Tale and came as a total shock to most people in attendance. Several people around me audibly gasped, and the minister essentially said the only responsibility of the husband was to consider his wife. The marriage lasted less than a year, and thankfully they split up before they had kids. Story 39. Guy's friend got married. At the reception, she's on one side of the room talking. He's across the hall. Same thing, talking to someone else. She either snapped her fingers or did the come here finger sign. I can't remember which it was, but she summoned him to her. When he got there, she wanted him to hold her train and she kept on with her conversation. Typed out, it doesn't sound that bad, but when it happened, I was like, really, lady? It was rather degrading to watch him get treated like her servant. Turns out they're still together, but for his sake, I wish that hadn't been the case. Story 40. My best friend always dreamed of her wedding day, having children, etc. They had been friends since we were 2, so I know. We talked about it a lot, and we vowed we would be each other's maid of honor. The boy came into her life, and she was head over heels for him, but he never really seemed to be the romantic type. Long story short, they got engaged, and all of a sudden she didn't want a big wedding. She wanted an elopement with no bridesmaids. Then the talk of children came about, and she didn't want children anymore. I know that plans can change as we grow older, but this wasn't her. Nonetheless, I supported her. They did have a big reception. My only guess is that this was the compromise. At the reception, I remember the groom just not being around at all. He just drank and hung out with his friends and barely spent time with his wife. In my heart, I knew it wasn't going to last. Well, 5 years into the marriage, this man-child cheated on her and broke her. It took her a while to recover from it, but today she's so much better off with a man who's treating her right, and she's happily talking about the wedding she has always dreamed of and children. Story 41. The drive back to their hotel. I drove them from the wedding venue back to the hotel. I'd lined the back seats with plastic like a scene from Dexter because the groom couldn't stop retching. They were both unbelievably hammered. The entire ride, she screamed at him while he cried. She was furious the wedding had ended early, 12:30 a.m., because she wanted to dance and drink more. She had been cut off by the bartenders at midnight, and then her friends had also been cut off for giving her more drinks. I could have cleaned out the mess. I cannot clean out the awkwardness of that 15-minute drive. It was obvious this marriage was never going to make it. It's been 8 years. They're still together. Somewhere out there, there's a couples therapist who has earned their money. Story 42. My wife and I went to a cousin's wedding. Both of them were adults, still living at home. Both had low-paying jobs and had never been married. They were both 30+. When we got there, everyone was acting kind of weird during the ceremony and reception. We come to find out neither family wanted them getting married. The family priest did not want to do the services. It goes on and on. Weirdest thing ever. But they were oblivious to it all. It was like they were in a bubble. The marriage has been a tremendous success. They lifted each other up. Just goes to show there's a lid for every teapot. Story 43. My own. I used to be Mormon, and to get married in a Mormon temple is a big deal because you have to be in line with everything they teach and refrain from drinking. For marital intimacy, smoking, etc., get a temple recommendation. After we got changed into our temple clothes, the temple workers led us to a room right next to the sealing room where we could have a moment together before the ceremony started. After the worker left the room, I turned to my fiancé and said, "We did it. We made it. We're doing this." And he just looked me straight in the eye with no emotion and said, I could still say no. With all of our family and friends in the room next to us, waiting for us to get married in a matter of minutes. People thought I was crying during the ceremony because I felt the spirit, but I was crying because I was marrying someone who, I realized, always made me question whether or not he loved me. Marriage was pretty much all like that. So after a year and shrinking into a shell of my former self, I left. I also left the Mormon church. I'm single and happy now, simply living with my dog and have no plans to ever remarry. Story 44. Me and my wife had a little wedding lunch with my friend and his fiancé, my wife, and the best man. We had brought our son with us because my friend getting married hadn't met him yet and he wanted to. It was a year and a half at the time, so naturally he was curious about being in a new place and getting into things that were visibly annoying her. As the afternoon progresses, naturally the question comes up, how long after the wedding do y'all want to have kids, if any? And it turns out he's suffering to have like 4+ kids and she hates kids and doesn't want any. They had a huge fight and we ended up leaving. They still ended up getting married and just celebrated 1 year a couple of weeks ago. But me and my wife, as well as the best man, are having some doubts. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.